Sarah Martinez stepped off the city bus, her worn sneakers hitting the cracked sidewalk with a soft thud. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across downtown Seattle, and she pulled her faded denim jacket tighter around her shoulders. To anyone watching, she looked like just another tired woman heading home from her shift at the coffee shop on Pike Street. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her hands showed the small burns and calluses that came from working around hot espresso machines all day. She carried a small backpack containing her work apron, a half-eaten sandwich, and a paperback novel she never seemed to have time to finish. The coffee shop job paid barely enough to cover her tiny studio apartment, but Sarah didn't complain. She had learned long ago that blending in was sometimes the most important skill a person could have. Nobody looked twice at a quiet barista who made perfect lattes and kept to herself. As she walked toward her apartment building, Sarah noticed the unusual number of black SUVs parked along the street. Her steps didn't slow and her expression didn't change, but something deep in her mind began to whisper warnings. Years of training had taught her to catalog details without appearing to notice them. 3 vehicles, tinted windows, government plates, men in dark suits trying to look casual while standing on street corners, radio earpieces barely visible under jacket collars. Sarah continued walking at the same steady pace, but her awareness sharpened. She counted at least 8 men positioned around a 3-block radius. Whatever was happening, it was big, and it was happening in her neighborhood. She turned the corner toward her building and saw Mrs. Chen, her elderly neighbor, standing on the front steps looking worried. Mrs. Chen had fled Vietnam decades ago and still got nervous around too many official-looking people. "Sarah, dear," Mrs. Chen called softly. "There are strange men asking questions about the building. They wanted to know about all the residents." Sarah nodded and gave the older woman what she hoped was a reassuring smile. "Probably just some routine government thing. You know how it is." But Sarah knew it wasn't routine. Her mind was already running through possibilities. Federal agents don't deploy in this kind of formation for routine anything. Someone important was either being protected or hunted. And based on the positioning of the teams, the center of their attention was very close to her building. She climbed the stairs to her 3rd-floor apartment, keys ready before she reached her door. Inside, she locked the deadbolt and the chain, then moved to her small kitchen window that overlooked the alley behind the building. 2 more SUVs, more men with earpieces. Sarah opened her refrigerator and pulled out a beer, taking a long sip while she thought. She had been Sarah Martinez, coffee shop worker, for almost 3 years now. Before that, she had been Sarah Martinez, college student, for 4 years. And before that, she had been someone else entirely. She was halfway through her beer when she heard the soft knock on her door. Not the heavy pounding of law enforcement, but 3 quick, quiet taps. Sarah set down her beer and moved silently to the peephole. A man stood in the hallway, tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped brown hair and the kind of posture that spoke of military training. He wore jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, but Sarah could see the slight bulge under his left armpit where he carried a concealed weapon. He was looking directly at the peephole, as if he knew she was watching. Sarah didn't recognize his face, but something about him seemed familiar. The way he held himself, the alert stillness that came from years of dangerous work. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice barely audible through the door. "I need to speak with you. It's about the situation outside." Sarah remained silent. She had learned that silence often told you more about people than words did. "Ma'am," the man continued, "I know you're there, and I know you've already counted the teams outside. 6 vehicles, minimum 12 operators, federal license plates on all of them." Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward the kitchen drawer where she kept her utility knife. This man knew too much to be selling insurance. "I'm not with them," the man said. "My name is Jackson. I'm here because someone needs to warn you that your cover is blown." The words hit Sarah like cold water. She had been so careful. 3 years of being nobody special. 3 years of perfect anonymity. "I don't know what you mean," Sarah called through the door, though her voice carried no real conviction. "Ghost," Jackson said quietly. The single word froze Sarah where she stood. Ghost. Her old call sign. A name she hadn't heard in 3 years. A name that belonged to someone who was supposed to be dead. "I served with Rodriguez," Jackson continued, his voice still barely above a whisper. "He talked about you before Kandahar. Said you could put a bullet through a dime at 1,000 yards in a sandstorm." Rodriguez. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering a young Marine sniper who had looked up to her like she was some kind of legend. Rodriguez, who had died in an IED explosion during what was supposed to be her last mission. "Rodriguez never made it home," Sarah said through the door. "No, ma'am, he didn't. But he talked about Ghost enough that some of us remember the stories. About the woman sniper who could make impossible shots. About the operator who saved 3 different missions in Syria. About someone who was so good that the Pentagon made her disappear after she started asking the wrong questions." Sarah's hand tightened on the door handle. This man knew too much. Either he was exactly who he said he was, or he was part of an elaborate trap. "What do you want?" she asked. "To warn you. There's a terrorist cell operating in this city. They've taken hostages. Federal response team is preparing to move, but they don't have the right intel. People are going to die." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I make coffee for a living. You've got the wrong person. 3 weeks ago, a man came into your coffee shop," Jackson said. "Middle Eastern, spoke with a slight accent. He ordered a Turkish coffee and sat in the corner booth for 2 hours, making phone calls in Arabic." Sarah's breath caught. She remembered the man. She had noticed him because Turkish coffee wasn't on their menu, and she had made it special for him using techniques she had learned during her time overseas. She had also noticed that his accent was fake, and that his phone calls weren't in Arabic, but in Farsi. Persian, not Arabic, a distinction that most Americans wouldn't catch. "You remember him," Jackson said. "I can tell by the silence. You also noticed that his accent was wrong and that he was speaking Farsi, not Arabic, because Ghost would notice something like that." "How do you know what I noticed?" "Because you called it in." Sarah's blood turned cold. She had called it in. Late that night, she had used an old, encrypted number to report the suspicious individual to a contact who was supposed to be monitoring for terrorist activity in the Pacific Northwest. It was the first time in 3 years that she had broken her cover to make any kind of official report. "The number you called," Jackson continued, "has been compromised for months. The people who were supposed to receive your report never got it. But the terrorist cell did." Sarah's mind raced. If the cell had intercepted her report, they would know someone had identified their operative. They would know that someone in the coffee shop had training and contacts. They would start looking for that someone. "How long do I have?" Sarah asked. "Maybe an hour, maybe less. They're already moving through the building, apartment by apartment. They think you're some kind of federal agent?" Sarah moved away from the door and began pulling items from hidden compartments around her small apartment. A ceramic knife taped under the kitchen sink. A small radio hidden inside a hollowed-out book. Emergency cash rolled up inside a vitamin bottle. "What's the situation with the hostages?" she called toward the door. 12 people in the Central Library downtown. The cell leader is demanding the release of 3 prisoners from federal custody. Government won't negotiate." Sarah pulled on dark clothing and laced up her sturdy hiking boots. "How do you know all this?" "Because I'm DevGru. I was part of the team sent to gather intel, but we're not equipped for this kind of urban rescue. Wrong tools, wrong training. We're underwater operators, not hostage rescue." DevGru. Navy SEAL Team 6. If Jackson was telling the truth, he was one of the most elite soldiers in the American military. "Why come to me?" Sarah asked, though she was already strapping a knife to her ankle. "Because the FBI's hostage rescue team won't be here for 6 hours. Local SWAT doesn't have the training for this level of threat. And those 12 people in the library are going to be dead in 4 hours when the cell realizes the government won't meet their demands." Sarah opened her bedroom closet and pushed aside old coats to reveal a small gun safe built into the wall. Inside were items she had hoped never to need again. A compact rifle broken down into components, specialized ammunition, a scope that could calculate wind drift and bullet drop automatically. "And because," Jackson continued, "Rodriguez always said that Ghost never left anyone behind." Sarah assembled her weapon with practiced efficiency, her hands moving through the familiar motions without conscious thought. The rifle felt like greeting an old friend. Dangerous, but comfortable in her hands. She moved back to the door. "If I open this door, there's no going back. Sarah Martinez, barista, disappears forever." "Ma'am," Jackson said quietly, "Sarah Martinez was always just a story you told yourself. Ghost is who you really are." Sarah unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. Jackson was younger than she had expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of lean muscle that came from constant physical training. His eyes were light blue and very serious. When he saw her properly equipped, he nodded with what looked like relief. "We need to move," he said. "My team is staged 2 blocks away. We can get you to the library, but after that it's your show." Sarah slung her rifle across her back and pulled a dark baseball cap low over her eyes. "What's the setup at the library?" 4 hostels that we know of, probably more. They've got civilians on the 3rd floor in the main reading room. Building has multiple exits, but they're watching all of them. Local police have the perimeter, but they're staying back because of the hostage situation. They moved quietly down the hallway toward the stairwell. As they reached the stairs, Sarah heard voices from the floor below. Men speaking in accented English, asking questions about residents. Jackson held up his hand, signaling for silence. They waited, listening. "Apartment 2B, elderly woman, been here 15 years, one voice was saying. "Apartment 2C, college student, loud music, parties on weekends." The terrorist cell was conducting their own canvassing operation, trying to identify which resident might be the source of the intelligence leak. Sarah and Jackson continued down the stairs, moving silently. On the 2nd floor landing, Sarah could see 2 men in the hallway, both carrying weapons concealed under their jackets. Jackson pointed to a fire exit at the end of the hallway. They would have to pass within 10 feet of the 2 men to reach it. Sarah shook her head and pointed upward toward the roof access. Jackson looked puzzled but followed her lead. On the roof, Sarah moved to the edge and looked down at the building's fire escape. It was rusty and old, but it would support their weight if they were careful. "This building connects to the next one through the basement," Sarah whispered. "Shared utility systems. We can get out through the building next door." Jackson looked impressed. "How do you know that?" Sarah almost smiled. "Ghost always studies her environment." They climbed down the fire escape and made their way to the basement through a maintenance door that Sarah had identified months ago during her initial survey of her new neighborhood. Old habits died hard, and even as a coffee shop worker, she had maintained basic operational security protocols. The basement was dark and smelled of old concrete and heating oil. They moved carefully between furnaces and water heaters toward the utility tunnels that connected the building to its neighbor. As they emerged from the basement of the adjacent building, Sarah felt the familiar weight of operational readiness settling over her. The quiet barista was disappearing, replaced by someone harder and more focused. Jackson led her to where a dark sedan waited in an alley. 2 more men sat in the front seats, both with the same alert posture and military bearing. "Ghost," Jackson said as they climbed into the back seat. "Meet the team." The man in the passenger seat turned around. He was older than Jackson, with graying hair and scars on his hands. "Ma'am, I'm Senior Chief Watson. Rodriguez was one of ours before he joined the Marines. He talked about you a lot." Sarah nodded. "What's our approach to the library?" The driver, a quiet man with dark skin and thoughtful eyes, handed her a tablet showing building schematics. "I'm Petty Officer Martinez, no relation despite the name. Library has 3 entrances: main entrance on 4th Street, emergency exits on the east and west sides, and service entrance in the rear for deliveries." Sarah studied the layout, her mind automatically calculating fields of fire, cover positions, and approach routes. It felt like putting on an old uniform that still fit perfectly. "How many civilians?" she asked. 12 confirmed, Watson replied. "Library staff and patrons who were there when the cell moved in. They're all on the 3rd floor. Security cameras? Disabled. Cell was well prepared for this operation." Sarah continued studying the building layout. The 3rd floor reading room was large and open, with high windows and few places for cover. It was chosen deliberately to make any rescue attempt nearly impossible. "Timeline?" she asked. Jackson checked his watch. 3 hours, 40 minutes until their deadline. After that, they start killing hostages." Sarah handed back the tablet and checked her equipment one final time. Her rifle was loaded and ready. Her scope was zeroed for urban distances. She had enough ammunition for a prolonged engagement, though she hoped it wouldn't come to that. "There's something else," Watson said quietly. "The cell leader. We think he's the one who was in your coffee shop." Sarah looked up sharply. The man with the fake accent and the Farsi phone calls. If he was the cell leader, then this entire situation had started because she had done her job and reported suspicious activity. "He knows someone identified him," she said. "Yes, ma'am, which means he's going to be extra careful and extra paranoid." Sarah nodded. It also meant that this was personal. The cell leader would want to know who had compromised his operative. When this was over, assuming she survived, he would come looking for answers. But that was a problem for later. Right now, there were 12 innocent people who needed someone to bring them home safely. The sedan pulled up to a parking garage 6 blocks from the library. Sarah could see the building in the distance, surrounded by police cars and emergency vehicles that were maintaining a careful perimeter. "This is as close as we can get you," Jackson said. "After this, you're on your own until you signal for extraction." Sarah climbed out of the car, her rifle secured in a guitar case that Martinez had provided. She looked back at the 3 Navy SEALs who had risked their careers to bring her back into the game. "Why?" she asked. "Why reach out to someone who's supposed to be dead?" Jackson met her eyes. "Because sometimes the mission is more important than the rules, and sometimes the person you need isn't the person you're supposed to ask for." Sarah shouldered the guitar case and started walking toward the library. Behind her, she heard the sedan drive away, leaving her alone on the streets of downtown Seattle. For the first time in 3 years, Ghost was operational again. Ghost moved through downtown Seattle like a shadow, keeping to side streets and avoiding the main police perimeter around the central library. The guitar case on her shoulder drew no attention from the few pedestrians she passed. In her dark clothing and baseball cap, she looked like just another musician heading to a late afternoon gig. She had covered 4 blocks when her old training kicked in fully. Every doorway became a potential threat position. Every window above street level was a possible sniper nest. Every parked car could be concealing additional hostile forces. The terrorist cell had chosen their target well. The central library was a modern glass and steel structure with limited approach routes and excellent fields of observation. From the 3rd floor reading room, they could see anyone approaching from blocks away. Ghost ducked into a coffee shop 2 blocks from the library, the irony not lost on her that she was seeking cover in the same type of establishment where this had all started. She ordered a simple black coffee and took a seat at a small table near the window. From this position, she could observe the police perimeter without drawing attention. She counted marked patrol cars, unmarked detective vehicles, and at least one FBI command post set up in a mobile operations center. The official response was impressive, but it was also exactly what the terrorists expected. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thermal imaging shows 4 hostiles on 3rd floor, 12 civilians in northeast corner, 1 hostile patrolling, 3 static positions. Ghost deleted the message immediately. Jackson and his team were providing intelligence support, probably from a surveillance position several blocks away. She studied the library building through the coffee shop window. The main entrance was clearly being watched by law enforcement, but the terrorists would have their own observation posts. Any approach from that direction would be spotted long before she could get close. The service entrance in the rear was less visible from the street, but it would be the obvious choice for any tactical team. The cell would be watching it carefully. That left the emergency exits on the east and west sides of the building. Both were equipped with alarm systems that would announce any breach, but Ghost had dealt with similar systems before. She finished her coffee and left a $5 tip, a habit from her barista days that made her smile grimly. Some patterns were hard to break, even when returning to a world where people shot at you for a living. Moving to the east side of the building required a 6-block detour through the city's financial district. Ghost used the time to study her environment and plan her approach. The east emergency exit opened onto a narrow alley that ran between the library and a high-rise office building. The alley was visible from the street at both ends, but there was a maintenance area halfway down where she could work without being observed. As she walked, Ghost's mind shifted into tactical mode. She mentally cataloged her equipment. Her rifle broken down in the guitar case, 120 rounds of ammunition, her ceramic knife, a small radio, and basic climbing gear she had grabbed from her apartment. It wasn't much for a hostage rescue operation, but Ghost had learned long ago that the operator was more important than the equipment. She reached the alley and moved to the maintenance area, a small recessed space that housed electrical panels and utility meters for both buildings. From here, she was invisible to observers at either end of the alley. Ghost set down the guitar case and pulled out a small device that looked like a smartphone, but was actually a sophisticated electronic warfare tool. She had acquired it during her last official mission, before everything went wrong and she became someone who didn't exist. The device scanned the emergency exit's alarm system and displayed its specifications on the small screen. It was a basic magnetic contact system, the kind used in thousands of commercial buildings. Ghost smiled. She had defeated more sophisticated security during training exercises. Her phone buzzed again. Hostile movement inside. Cell leader making demands to police negotiator. 2 more hours until deadline. Ghost typed back quickly. What demands? The response came immediately. Release of 3 prisoners from federal custody. Transport to international waters. Safe passage to non-extradition country. Standard terrorist playbook. Make demands that couldn't be met, then escalate when the deadline passed. The cell leader wasn't really trying to negotiate. He was buying time for something else. Ghost studied the building's exterior walls. The library's modern design included decorative concrete panels that created small ledges and handholds. It would be possible to climb to the 2nd floor without using the monitored entrances. She disassembled her rifle and distributed the components around her body, securing them with elastic straps and tape. The scope went inside her jacket. The barrel sections were taped along her legs under her pants. The action and trigger assembly went in a small backpack she had brought for this purpose. Ghost approached the emergency exit and attached her electronic device to the alarm panel. The device began working through the system's security protocols, searching for the right combination of signals that would disable the alarm without triggering any backup systems. While she waited, Ghost noticed something that made her pause. Fresh scratches around the lock mechanism on the emergency door. Someone had been here recently and they had been in a hurry. She examined the scratches more carefully. They were too fresh to be from maintenance work, but they weren't random either. Someone with lock-picking skills had opened this door within the last few days. Ghost's mind began working through possibilities. Had the cell conducted reconnaissance of the building before their operation? That would be standard practice, but it also meant they might have prepared countermeasures for anyone trying to use the same route. Her device beeped softly. The alarm system was neutralized. Ghost tested the door handle and felt it turn freely. She opened the door just enough to peer inside. The emergency exit opened onto a stairwell that was completely dark. No movement, no sound except the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Ghost slipped inside and closed the door behind her. She moved carefully up the stairwell, testing each step before putting her full weight on it. Old buildings sometimes had stairs that creaked, and any unnecessary noise could compromise her approach. On the second-floor landing, Ghost paused and listened. Through the fire door, she could hear the normal sounds of a building during operational hours: computers humming, fluorescent lights buzzing, the distant murmur of voices. But the voices were wrong. Too few of them, and speaking too quietly. During normal library hours, there should be dozens of staff members and patrons creating the usual background noise of a busy public building. Ghost continued to the third floor. Here, the sounds were different. Footsteps moving in regular patterns, the sound of someone pacing, occasional radio chatter in a language she recognized as Farsi. She opened the stairwell door just enough to see into the third-floor hallway. Empty, but well lit. The main reading room was at the far end of the hall, past offices and conference rooms that would provide cover during her approach. Ghost slipped into the hallway and moved toward the reading room, staying close to the wall and avoiding the center of the corridor where she would be visible from multiple directions. She reached the first office and tested the door. Unlocked. Inside, she found a typical librarian's workspace with a computer, bookshelves, and a window that looked out toward the main reading room. Through the window, Ghost could see the hostage situation for the first time. 12 civilians sat in the northeast corner of the large reading room, exactly as Jackson's intelligence had indicated. They were library staff and patrons who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ghost could see adults and teenagers, including what appeared to be a mother with her young son. 4 armed men moved around the reading room in loose patrol patterns. 3 carried assault rifles, and the 4th, who appeared to be the cell leader, carried a pistol and what looked like a radio detonator. Ghost's blood turned cold when she saw the detonator. The cell hadn't just taken hostages, they had rigged the building with explosives. If this operation went wrong, they could bring down part of the library and kill dozens of people beyond just the hostages. She studied the cell leader more carefully and recognized him immediately. The same man who had ordered Turkish coffee in her shop 3 weeks ago. The man whose fake accent and wrong language had started this entire chain of events. The cell leader was speaking into a radio, probably communicating with the police negotiators outside. Ghost couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language suggested growing impatience. She moved to the next office and assembled her rifle, working quickly but carefully to ensure all components were properly secured. Once the weapon was complete, she attached her scope and checked the 0 settings. From this position, she had clear lines of sight to 3 of the 4 terrorists, but the hostages were positioned in a way that made clean shots nearly impossible. Any rescue attempt would have to be carefully coordinated to avoid civilian casualties. Ghost's phone vibrated with another message. Police negotiator says cell leader becoming agitated, may move up timeline. She typed back, building is rigged with explosives, need bomb disposal. The response was immediate. Negative, no time for EOD response. Can you neutralize? Ghost studied the reading room again. The cell leader was holding what appeared to be a dead man switch for the explosives. If he was killed or incapacitated suddenly, he might trigger the charges reflexively. She needed a different approach. Ghost moved through the office building's layout, using connecting doors and interior corridors to position herself in an office directly adjacent to the reading room. From here, she could hear the conversation between the cell leader and the negotiator. "You have 1 hour," the cell leader was saying into his radio. "If our brothers are not released and transport is not provided, we begin executing hostages, starting with the children." The mother in the hostage group instinctively pulled her son closer. Ghost could see the fear in the woman's eyes, and it reminded her of why she had become an operator in the first place. Some people needed someone to stand between them and the darkness. Ghost checked her watch. 1 hour. She needed to identify the explosive charges, determine how to neutralize the dead man switch, and eliminate 4 armed terrorists without getting any civilians killed. It was the kind of impossible mission she had specialized in during her official career. She moved to a position where she could see more of the reading room's layout. The cell had positioned themselves professionally, with overlapping fields of fire and good observation of all approaches. But they had made one crucial mistake. They were focused on external threats. They weren't expecting someone to already be inside the building. Ghost began developing her plan. The cell leader with the detonator had to be neutralized first, but in a way that wouldn't trigger the explosives. That meant a precision shot that would disable his nervous system instantly, preventing any reflexive muscle movement. The other 3 terrorists would have to be eliminated in rapid succession before they could react to the loss of their leader. That meant multiple target engagement at close range, something that required perfect timing and execution. She studied the hostage positions and identified the safest direction for them to move when the shooting started. The northeast corner where they were grouped had a clear path to a secondary exit, if they could reach it during the confusion. Ghost moved back to her rifle and began making final preparations. She adjusted her scope for the shorter range and verified that her ammunition was properly seated. She had trained for situations like this hundreds of times, but training was different from reality. In training, the hostages were played by volunteers who knew they were safe. In reality, the 12 people in that room were depending on her to make no mistakes. Her phone buzzed with an update. 45 minutes to deadline. Cell leader on radio with someone outside building. Possible additional support arriving. Ghost looked out the office window toward the street and saw what Jackson was referring to. A van had parked across from the library's main entrance, and 2 men were unloading equipment cases. They moved with the same professional efficiency as the cell inside the building. The terrorist operation was larger than initially assessed. The 4 men in the library weren't the entire cell, they were just the assault team. The men outside were probably technical support, communications specialists, or reinforcements waiting to be called in. This complicated Ghost's mission considerably. Even if she successfully neutralized the immediate threat in the reading room, there were additional hostiles outside who could interfere with civilian evacuation or pursue escaping hostages. Ghost sent a message to Jackson. "Additional hostiles outside. Need support for extraction." The response came quickly. "We see them. We'll handle external threats when you signal. Ready when you are." Ghost moved back to her shooting position and settled into a stable firing stance. Through her scope, she could see the cell leader clearly. He was standing near a large window, probably chosen to give the police negotiators a clear view of him during communication. The dead man switch in his hand was a simple device, probably wired to charges placed around the building's support structure. If the device detected a loss of grip pressure or a sudden change in the electrical current, it would send a signal to the explosive charges. Ghost had dealt with similar devices before. The key was to disrupt the nervous system so completely that the hand would remain closed around the switch even after death. It required perfect shot placement and immediate follow-up action. She shifted her aim to study the other 3 terrorists. They were positioned in a triangle around the hostages. Close enough to control the civilians, but far enough apart to avoid being taken down by a single shooter. unless that shooter was very good and very fast. Ghost checked her watch again, 37 minutes until the deadline. Time to begin the operation. She sent a final message to Jackson. Commencing assault in 60 seconds. Be ready for extraction. Ghost took a deep breath and settled into her shooting position. Through her scope, she could see the cell leader raising his radio to speak with the negotiators again. This would be her best opportunity, while he was focused on the conversation and relatively stationary. She began her breathing routine, the same pattern she had used on dozens of successful missions. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, exhale for 4 counts, hold empty for 4 counts. On her third exhale, Ghost squeezed the trigger. The suppressed rifle made only a soft coughing sound as the bullet left the barrel. Through her scope, Ghost saw the cell leader's head snap back as the bullet struck him precisely at the base of his skull, severing his spinal cord instantly. His hand remained closed around the dead man's switch as he collapsed. Ghost was already shifting to her second target before the first terrorist hit the ground. The remaining 3 men were beginning to react, but human reflexes were measured in fractions of seconds, and Ghost was faster than most humans. Her second shot took the terrorist nearest to the hostages, preventing him from using the civilians as human shields. The bullet caught him center mass as he was raising his rifle, and he dropped without firing a shot. The third terrorist was more alert than his companions. He had identified the direction of the shots and was bringing his weapon to bear on Ghost's position when her bullet found him. Unlike the first 2 shots, which had been precisely placed to ensure instant incapacitation, this one was a hasty shot designed to stop an immediate threat. It worked. The third terrorist spun around and fell behind a reading table. The fourth terrorist had used the time to take cover behind a bookshelf, and he was now firing in Ghost's direction. Bullets shattered the office window and sent glass fragments flying around her position. Ghost rolled away from the window and moved to a different shooting angle. The fourth terrorist was experienced and disciplined. He was laying down covering fire while probably calling for backup from the team outside. Through the broken window, Ghost could hear the hostages screaming and moving toward the secondary exit she had identified. At least some of them were following their survival instincts and getting clear of the danger zone. Ghost found a new shooting position and acquired the fourth terrorist through her scope. He was partially concealed behind the bookshelf, but part of his torso was visible as he reloaded his weapon. Ghost took the shot and saw the terrorist fall, but she couldn't confirm whether he was dead or just wounded. Either way, the immediate threat to the hostages was neutralized. She grabbed her radio and transmitted a brief message. Reading room clear, hostages evacuating, move on external targets. The response from Jackson was immediate. Roger. External team neutralized. Emergency vehicles moving to your location. Ghost disassembled her rifle quickly and secured the components around her body again. She needed to be out of the building before the official response teams arrived and started asking questions about who had conducted the assault. She moved toward the secondary exit where the hostages had fled, planning to use their escape route to avoid the main building entrances where law enforcement would be concentrating. As she reached the stairwell, Ghost paused to look back at the reading room. 4 terrorists lay motionless among overturned tables and scattered books. The cell leader still clutched the dead man's switch that hadn't detonated. 12 innocent people were safe, and a terrorist operation had been stopped before it could escalate further. But Ghost knew this wasn't over. The cell leader had been communicating with someone outside the building, someone who would want answers about what had gone wrong. When word spread about the failed operation, there would be questions about who had compromised their security and eliminated their team. Sarah Martinez, barista, was officially dead now. There was no going back to the quiet life she had built for herself. Ghost was operational again, whether she wanted to be or not. Ghost moved down the emergency stairwell, her disassembled rifle secured around her body and her mind already shifting to extraction protocols. Through the building's walls, she could hear the approaching sirens of emergency response vehicles and the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors overhead. The official cavalry was arriving, but they were responding to a situation that had already been resolved by someone who wasn't supposed to exist. She reached the ground floor and paused at the emergency exit to listen. Outside, she could hear shouted commands as law enforcement teams moved to secure the building. They would be operating under the assumption that the terrorist threat was still active, which meant anyone they encountered would be considered potentially hostile until proven otherwise. Ghost needed to be clear of the area before the building was locked down for investigation. She opened the emergency door carefully and found herself in the same alley where she had begun her infiltration. The narrow space between buildings was still empty, but she could see flashing police lights reflecting off the walls at both ends. Moving toward the rear of the alley, Ghost found a maintenance ladder that led to the roof of the adjacent office building. She climbed quickly, her urban warfare training taking over as she moved from one rooftop to another, staying low to avoid being silhouetted against the skyline. From the roof of a building 2 blocks away, Ghost could see the entire emergency response operation unfolding around the library. Police vehicles, fire trucks, and ambulances surrounded the building while helicopters circled overhead. It was an impressive display of coordinated emergency response, even if it had arrived after the primary threat was neutralized. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jackson. "Extraction point is parking garage on 5th Street. 3rd level, northeast corner. 10 minutes. Ghost acknowledged the message and began making her way across the downtown rooftops toward the rendezvous point. Moving across urban terrain at elevation required careful planning and precise execution, but it was a skill she had maintained even during her 3 years as a civilian. The city looked different from above, especially at dusk when the lights were beginning to come on in office buildings and apartments. For 3 years, Ghost had lived in this city as just another resident, never imagining that she would one day be moving across its rooftops as an operational asset again. As she moved, her mind processed what had happened in the library. The terrorist operation had been more sophisticated than a typical domestic threat. The cell had demonstrated planning, discipline, and technical capability that suggested professional training and external support. The dead man's switch setup indicated knowledge of explosive ordnance that went beyond basic terrorism tactics. The coordination between the assault team and the external support team showed operational sophistication that was usually associated with state-sponsored groups. Someone had invested considerable resources in this operation, which meant the failure would not be ignored. There would be investigations, retaliations, and efforts to identify who had compromised the mission. Ghost reached the parking garage and made her way to the 3rd level. She found Jackson's team waiting in the same sedan they had used earlier, parked in a corner spot that provided good observation of approach routes while remaining inconspicuous. "How'd it go?" Jackson asked as Ghost climbed into the back seat. "Threat neutralized. All hostages safe. Building is secure." Ghost's report was brief and professional, the way she had been trained to communicate during debriefings. "Outstanding," Watson said from the front passenger seat. "Local news is already reporting that the hostage situation has been resolved, but they're not releasing details about casualties or how it ended." Ghost nodded. The official story would probably credit the FBI's hostage rescue team or local SWAT with resolving the situation. There would be no mention of a supposedly dead sniper who had conducted the actual rescue operation. "What about the external support team?" Ghost asked. Martinez, who was driving, answered without turning around. "2 suspects in custody. They tried to run when the shooting started inside the building, but we were ready for them. They're being processed by federal agents now." "Did they talk?" "Not yet, but they had interesting equipment in their van. Communications gear, additional weapons, and what looked like surveillance photos of downtown locations. This wasn't just a library operation, it was part of something bigger." Ghost absorbed this information while considering the implications. A larger terrorist operation meant more people who would want answers about what had gone wrong. It also meant that her involvement in stopping the attack would eventually be discovered by hostile intelligence services. The sedan left the parking garage and merged into the early evening traffic. Ghost noticed that Jackson was taking a roundabout route through the city, probably to ensure they weren't being followed and to give the immediate area around the library time to settle down. "Where are we going?" Ghost asked. "Safe house," Jackson replied. "We need to debrief this operation properly, and you need to decide what comes next. What comes next is that I disappear again. New city, new identity, new life." Watson turned around to look at her. "Ma'am, with respect, that's not going to work this time. Too many people know you're alive now. The terrorist cell that got rolled up today was part of a larger network, and they're going to want to know how their operation was compromised." Ghost had been afraid of this. Once you were operational again, it was almost impossible to go back to being a civilian. The skills, the knowledge, and most importantly, the enemies that came with the job didn't just disappear when you tried to retire. "Besides," Jackson added, "we could use someone like you. The threats we're facing now are different from traditional military operations. We need operators who can blend in with civilian populations and work independently when official channels aren't available." "I'm officially dead," Ghost pointed out. "I don't exist in any government database, and there's no legal framework for my employment." "Actually," Watson said with a slight smile, "there is. It's called the Special Activities Division, and they specialize in employing people who don't officially exist." Ghost knew about SAD, the CIA's paramilitary division that handled operations too sensitive for regular military forces and too dangerous for traditional intelligence officers. It was where operators went when their official careers ended, but their skills were still needed. "I never worked for the agency," Ghost said. "No, but you worked for people who work for the agency. And your service record, before it was classified beyond recognition, shows exactly the kind of capabilities SAD looks for." The sedan pulled into a residential neighborhood of modest houses and tree-lined streets. It was the kind of area where a group of government employees could meet without attracting attention, assuming they were careful about operational security. Jackson parked in the driveway of a house that looked like all the others on the block. White siding, small front yard, older model cars parked on the street. The perfect cover for a safe house operation. Inside, the house was furnished like a typical middle-class home. But Ghost noticed the subtle signs of a professional installation: reinforced door frames, blackout curtains, and communication equipment disguised as everyday electronics. "Coffee?" Martinez asked, gesturing toward a kitchen that had been set up for extended operations. Ghost accepted gratefully. It had been a long day, and caffeine would help her think through the decisions she needed to make. As she sipped the coffee, Ghost realized it was excellent quality, much better than what she would have expected in a temporary safe house. Someone had taken care to stock the location with good supplies, which suggested this wasn't a hastily arranged operation. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. Jackson and Watson exchanged glances before Watson answered. 6 months. Ever since intelligence reports started indicating increased terrorist activity in the Pacific Northwest." "You've been watching me for 6 months?" "Not watching," Jackson corrected. "Researching. When Rodriguez talked about Ghost, he mentioned that you had gone to ground in Seattle after your official career ended. It took our analysts some time to identify which Sarah Martinez was actually you." Ghost felt a chill run down her spine. If Jackson's team had been able to identify her despite 3 years of careful operational security, then other people could do the same thing. Her cover had been compromised long before the terrorist cell had started looking for her. "Who else knows?" she asked. "Our team, our immediate commander, and one person in the Pentagon who authorized this approach. Watson replied. But after today's operation, that circle is going to expand whether we want it to or not. The library operation will be investigated thoroughly, Martinez added. Someone is going to notice that the terrorist threat was neutralized by precision rifle fire from an elevated position inside the building. They're going to start asking questions about who had the access and capability to conduct that kind of operation. Ghost nodded. She had been thinking the same thing. Law enforcement investigators weren't stupid, and the evidence at the scene would tell a clear story to anyone who knew how to read it. "So what are you proposing?" she asked. "Come back," Jackson said simply. "Officially this time. SAD can provide you with a new identity that's backed by the full resources of the intelligence community. Legal documentation, financial support, operational equipment, and most importantly, protection from the people who are going to be looking for you. In exchange for what? For doing what you did today, being the person who can go places and do things that official government operators can't do, being Ghost." Ghost walked to the window and looked out at the quiet neighborhood street. Children were playing on sidewalks while their parents watched from front porches. It was the kind of normal life she had been trying to build for herself as Sarah Martinez. But Sarah Martinez was dead now, killed by the same instincts and training that had saved 12 innocent people in a downtown library. "What kind of operations?" Ghost asked. "Counter-terrorism, primarily," Watson answered. "Situations like today, where time is critical and official response channels are too slow or too visible. Operations that require someone who can blend into civilian populations and work without backup or official support. Assassinations? When necessary, but mostly intelligence gathering, surveillance, and intervention operations designed to prevent terrorist attacks before they happen." Ghost turned back to face the three SEALs. "And if I say no? Then we help you establish a new identity in whatever city you choose, provide some financial support to get you started, and hope that the people looking for answers about today don't find you," Jackson replied. "But they will find me eventually. Probably. You're too good at what you do to stay hidden forever. And after today, too many people have reasons to look for you." Ghost drank the last of her coffee and set down the cup. She had known this moment would come eventually. The life of a deep cover operator always ended the same way. Either you died in the field, or you came back to official service when your cover was blown. There was no real retirement from this kind of work. "If I come back," Ghost said, "I want to know everything. About the terrorist network that was operating today, about the intelligence that led to their identification, and about any other threats currently being tracked in this region." "Agreed," Watson said immediately. "I want operational independence. I choose my own methods, my own equipment, and my own timeline. I'll accept mission parameters, but not micromanagement." "Also agreed. And I want protection for Mrs. Chen." Jackson looked puzzled. "Who's Mrs. Chen?" "My neighbor. An elderly woman who fled Vietnam 40 years ago and who was worried about the government agents asking questions in our building today. If hostile forces start investigating my former identity, she could be targeted for information she doesn't have." "We can arrange protection," Watson assured her. Ghost looked around the safe house one more time, thinking about the coffee shop where she had worked for 3 years, the small apartment where she had lived quietly, and the simple life she had built as someone who didn't matter to anyone. That life was over now. Had been over the moment Jackson whispered her call sign in a hallway and reactivated something she had thought was buried forever. "All right," Ghost said. "I'm in." Jackson smiled and pulled out a secure phone. "I'll notify our handler. Welcome back to the game, Ghost." As Jackson made the call, Ghost realized that she felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years: purpose. The quiet satisfaction of using her skills to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Sarah Martinez, the barista, had been a fiction, a story she told herself about who she could be if she walked away from the darkness. But Ghost was real. Ghost was someone who stood between innocent people and the forces that wanted to hurt them. And apparently, the world still needed Ghost. Martinez approached with a new cup of coffee and a tablet computer. "Your first briefing materials," he said. "Intelligence reports on terrorist cell activities in the Pacific Northwest over the last 6 months." Ghost accepted the tablet and began reading. The reports painted a picture of a sophisticated network that had been operating under the radar of traditional law enforcement and intelligence agencies. The library operation had been just one part of a larger plan that included targets in Portland, Vancouver, and possibly San Francisco. "How much of this network is still operational?" she asked. "Unknown," Watson replied. "But based on the communications equipment recovered from the support team today, we think there are at least 3 more active cells in the region." Ghost continued reading, her tactical mind automatically analyzing the intelligence for patterns and vulnerabilities. This was the kind of complex threat that required exactly the kind of operator she had been trained to be. "When do I start?" she asked. "You already have," Jackson said, ending his phone call. "SAD wants a full debrief on today's operation by tomorrow morning, and they're sending a handler to meet with you this weekend. And after that, we hunt down the rest of this network before they can regroup and plan another attack." Ghost nodded and settled into a chair with the briefing materials. Outside, the sun was setting over Seattle, marking the end of one chapter of her life and the beginning of another. Sarah Martinez was dead, but Ghost was very much alive, and there was work to do.